So Sara Mudge, I am an electrical engineer, and I've been with NB Power now for 9 years in a variety of different roles. And currently I am the senior technical lead for efficiency services in a project called Smart Grid Atlantic. So I get to spend my time really trying to figure out what does the future look like and how do we help ourselves as a utility, but more importantly, our customers to navigate through this energy transition world. So everything about how do we build more energy efficient homes? How do we retrofit homes and businesses to make more energy efficient? How do we manage the transition to electrification, whether it's heating systems, vehicles, or just all those crazy processing loads we're going to see transitioning for commercial industrial customers. So really trying to stay at the forefront of things like codes and standards, and things that I'm very interested at the moment, codes and standards. I know that sounds super geeky, but I love it. Always have loved codes and standards. And so I sit on a few different committees with the Canadian Standards Association. And the one that I'm super excited about right now is an energy behavior standard. So taking behavioral science and pairing it with energy efficiency programs and demand side management programs, because we can throw money at things, we can throw technology at things, but if people don't see the value in it, if they don't see the benefits of it, or if it's just weird, scary, or overwhelming, it's not going to be helpful to them. So we have to really put ourselves in people's shoes to understand, do they even see some of the same problems that we as utilities or policymakers see and understand about what's happening in this energy world? And if they don't, why would they ever participate in our programs or our products and services? So definitely making sure that we can meet our customers where they are at and come up with solutions that are going to benefit them as well as everyone else trying to get through the energy transition. So again, coming from that kind of like utility and energy management perspective, it's always been about how do we generate electricity? How do we help people, when they turn on a light switch, when they turn on that Xbox, whatever it is that they're doing that requires electricity, how do we make sure that there's a reliable supply there? So kind of that historical context, NB Power has been around for over 100 years now, which is kind of exciting and scary and weird at the same time. But really, if you look at the last 100 years, it was about building and growing an electricity system. And then it became about maintaining that electricity system. And now we're going through another growth period with more electrification of other new things, but technology is changing so quickly. So I would say that before it was really just, what is the best thing that we can do? Take a decade to plan it and figure it out, build it and expect it to last, 30, 40, 50 years, right? Big power plants. The world is not going to change drastically in the next couple of decades. Now, that's all out the window, right? Everything is changing so quickly. Technology is available to us and changing. You can get a new version of a vehicle on an annual basis, updates to phones every 6 months. And consumer technology is changing. Just go to a home show and every year there's, 20 new heat pump models that have something crazy about them, bigger, better than the year before. So we're just bombarded now with new technologies and the world is changing so much. So kind of from that utility context, how do we plan 25 years out when technologies that we're just looking at for the first time today could be obsolete 3 years from now, right? So this is kind of that world that we're in. And so being able to help guide our consumers is the other thing towards making decisions today that are going to be good investments, that aren't going to become something that, it's shiny and new today, but it's outdated just a few years from now, right? So that's kind of a weird world that we're transitioning through. So that sense of we know what we're doing because we've been doing it for a long time doesn't really exist anymore because it's all changing. And I think that is one of the intriguing and exciting things that's happening in the industry right now is how quickly it's changing and being there to see what's happening and what's changing. But it's a little intimidating at the same time because you're having confidence that yes, we can take time to plan, we can build things that are going to last for decades. That's not going to happen anymore. So really being open to innovation is so important. And that's a big mindset. And like I was saying earlier, energy behavior standards. I mean, as an engineer, come up with the money, come up with the technology, and people will do their thing. But that doesn't work so much anymore, right? So even just the traditional way that we've done things like promote energy efficiency programs, promote new technologies, promote new products and services, It all has to change because this energy transition depends so much, not on technology. Technology is great and there's new ones coming all the time, but people's ability to adapt to technology. And if we aren't taking that people-centric view of things, we're going to leave folks behind. And then we're not going to be successful in the energy transition because we have to do it together as a society. If we really want to do things like get to net zero, incorporate more renewable energy, better manage the systems that we have. So I think that sense of every time we're designing or building something, we have to keep the end user at the forefront is very different for utilities and, you know, efficiency program people and products and services in the whole distributed energy world. We wouldn't have thought of the person turning the light switch on and off when designing an electricity system in the past. Now we have to think that way because it's not just, you know, is it going to be there when they turn it on and off? It's how much do they need and how do we help them manage it if, you know, they're exceeding what we can provide. So the ability to ensure reliability and all those other things is a whole other world that we've never faced before. We don't have to continue doing it the same way. So that ability for people to produce their own power on site. So, you know, rooftop solar at a home or a business, the ability to store that energy, the ability to manage that energy, whether it's a smart thermostat, you know, or just having energy monitoring through things like smart meters. Our entire world and concept of electricity is so different now than it was 100 years ago when we were first building these systems that we know today. So decentralized energy, in my mind, is something that is really going to be that forefront of how we do energy differently, because we're going to start seeing more local generation, less long haul generation. I think we're still going to need the long haul just to back up the networks and maintain voltage reliability and things like that. But, you know, much more producing it where we're using it and managing it and storing it where we're using it. Yeah, I really think that ability to manage energy, and I think that's going to be our biggest challenge, is that as we continue to electrify as a means to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we're going to need to find more ways to live within our means. Like today, the expectation is if I turn on that light switch, the power is there, no ifs, ands, or buts. We've never really told people in recent history, you can't have electricity as much as you want whenever you want it, which is kind of comical because in the early days of electricity, you know, they would put a note in the newspaper or they'd send a town crier around to say, turn off your lights because we don't have enough electricity right now. But, you know, none of us are still around that lived in that era, so we don't remember it. But we're getting back there, right? So we saw that happen in Alberta, you know, with the rolling outage alerts in the winter. Like, who wants to have their power cut off in the middle of the winter, especially in a province like New Brunswick where we heat with electricity? No one wants that, right? So this whole concept of we might not be able to just produce as much as we need whenever we want because everything is changing. The amount of electricity that we're using is changing. So that ability to manage electricity, the ability to monitor my energy consumption. What is on right now? What can I actually turn off that doesn't need to be on? Because I think we take a lot of that for granted, but we all love to yell at our power bill when we get it at the end of the month, right? So that ability for homeowners and business owners to really take responsibility for managing their energy and not just expecting the utility to always have what they need. So you know, maybe it's incorporating not just managing monitoring, but the ability to produce on site, having backup storage, maybe to reduce my peak. So if I know I do need more, then the system will allow me right now, okay, maybe I just have to dispatch from that battery or there's some other form of storage or something else. Maybe it's just turning down that thermostat by a degree or two. So really understanding how those technologies can benefit you as a homeowner, both for the utility as well as for the consumer. So I just put a lot on the consumer about, how you have to manage your energy. But that's from the utilities perspective as well, right? So we have to adapt to all those technologies. And maybe there are new price signals and new programs that we can put in market because of these technologies. Hey, we're going to pay you to turn that battery on right now, or we're going to pay you to turn that thermostat down by a few degrees. Or, you know, better yet, programs that the utility can just send you a signal or a text message or whatever, and then you can react, right? So that's going to be a very different relationship between the customer and the utility, and much different use of technology. So again, it's an adjustment for everybody. For a century, NB Power's business model, we're a vertically integrated, so we're a crown corporation that's owned by the province of New Brunswick, government of New Brunswick, and we have socialized electricity. It's the same way that we all pay into the healthcare system and anybody can get it when they want. We've done the same thing with electricity. And so the electricity system has to be available to anyone in New Brunswick, and it has to be cost effective and offer equally to all of New Brunswick. So we can't say, well, you're going to pay more because you're further away in this corner. It's everyone has access to it, and it has to be as cost effective as possible. So one of the big challenges for us is that we've always taken government money, which we can get cost effective financing for because it's government. Usually they have good credit ratings, and built power plants. And then we basically say, if that power plant's going to last for 50 years, let's pay for it over 50 years to keep those costs and those rates as low as possible. We're probably not going to be in the business of owning big generation assets into the future. We still have to have power plants in the province because people are still going to be buying electricity, if not more of it. But maybe it's going to be less about the utility owning and operating a few big power plants, and instead there being several different operators. So, more wind farms, more community solar farms, more customers that are able to own and manage their own on-site generation. And the managing on-site generation, that looking at that as a generation asset. So the ability to dispatch load. So, if there's a whole bunch of batteries out there, we can say, hey, can you dispatch that battery to grid? That's like having a generation asset, right? So very different way for us of looking at it, that it's not just about big power plants anymore. It's about each individual user being a part of that broader electricity story. Smart grid, right? We have to modernize for smart grid. New generation is coming. Old systems need to be taken offline. They need to be decommissioned. It takes money to do that. So unfortunately right now, even though we're saying that we want to have a 100% non-emitting grid by 2035 and everybody's on board with that, nobody wants to pay for it. So really trying to figure out, okay, if electricity is socialized, right? If we have to find the most cost-effective way to get there, trying to figure out where do we start first? And how do we get the most benefit up front? So really investing today in things like advanced metering infrastructure, smart meters, so that we can have more resiliency and more cost-effective energy management. As soon as that system is in place, we are at year 2 of a 3-year rollout. We just finished phase 1. We're just starting phase 2. So everyone's going to have a smart meter in New Brunswick in the next couple of years, which I'm sure you guys are like, okay, everybody else has got smart meters. It's new for New Brunswick. It's not new for the rest of Canada, but we're excited about it. But again, it comes at a cost, right? So there is that challenge of always needing to have that kind of step change. We have to have an increase this year to pay for the capital project, but then we're going to save in the coming years. And that's hard for people to understand. We're spending money on upgrading infrastructure, and yes, rates are going to increase because of it. But on the other hand, we have wonderful programs in market right now for folks that, if they are struggling to pay their bills and that 10% is just going to be too much for them. Okay, let's get them insulated. Let's get them a heat pump. Households less than $70,000 a year. It's all at no cost to them. Again, thanks to generous contributions from the federal provincial government. So, again, it's that double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, we have to invest in what needs to be invested in for the technology upgrades just to keep things up to date and safe and reliable, but also to modernize. But we can't leave people behind. So that's why we have to continue to invest in energy efficiency programs and new products and services like smart meters that are going to help them to manage the energy so they can keep those bills as low and stable as they can. One of the other things that's kind of interesting is nobody else knows this either is New Brunswick has the only nuclear power plant outside of Ontario that we built in the 70s. And when the rest of Canada was going through the oil crisis and saying, let's get off of oil and go on natural gas, we did not have access to natural gas in Canada. So we decided, let's build a nuclear power plant and convert everyone to electricity. And so that is why today, over 80% of homes and businesses in New Brunswick heat with electricity, which is kind of us and Quebec are the only 2 provinces that are that electrified already. A few years ago, we partnered with IBM. Have you ever heard of that computer Watson AI thing that they built? So they have really great weather analytics, and they actually created a company that does weather analytics, and their AI has basically, with very high 90% accuracy, can predict, depending on the type of storm, the intensity, the duration that's expected, how many outages and the types of outages that will happen on the system. So we can actually pre-deploy crews into different areas of the province. So if there's a really big storm coming to the entire province, okay, which areas are probably going to be the highest impacted, versus a small storm coming to a small region, things like that. But anyway, yeah, so it's kind of fun because we're using AI-based weather analytics, and we've helped to develop the outage prediction and resource optimization system with IBM. So we were the first utility in Canada to use that system, and it's now been expanded to other utilities across the country and into the States. So, that was kind of a cool one to play with. Early days of AI, there's so much possibility to be excited about. But if we don't make things so easy for the end user, we're not going to get there from a success standpoint, right? The other piece for me is backwards compatibility with codes and standards. Homes that were built 50 years ago did not envision the types of technologies that exist today. The grid that we have today was built, for big systems, power plants on the outside of the system, pushing electricity inward. Now we're talking about redesigning it to go the other way, that everyone's going to produce and use locally, right? We have to think about houses and the systems in houses that same way. And buildings, if they weren't built and designed to be compatible with those technologies, it's going to take an awful lot of effort to get them to compatibility. And not just effort from a, someone has to pay for it perspective, but there's labor involved, right? And we know that we're in a global labor shortage. So again, it's easy to say technology is going to solve all of the world's problems. And I'm sure we're going to invent the technologies, but having people out there to install those technologies, to maintain those technologies, to train 72-year-old parents with dementia on how to use those technologies, I think that's where our biggest challenge is going to be. So we really need to simplify it. Not that I'm saying everything has to be DIY, because again, big fan of codes and standards, love skilled trades, and I'm a big fan of safety. So I think that, we definitely have to make sure that we have the right folks with the right skill sets doing the quality work that needs to be done, because we do have to protect society as well, right? We don't want to go in with kind of shoddy, half-done things just to say we did it. I do think there's going to be a role for policymakers in there. And that's a tricky one, because policy is one of those things that we think of, especially like government and legislation and all that kind of fun stuff. It is like pulling teeth trying to get that stuff updated. And it takes a long time. And that's something that we do not have, right? So we need to figure out as a society, how do we make change happen faster without compromising on the integrity of the systems? So we still have to care about things like public safety, health and wellness, the end user, so that we're successful and don't, harm anyone in the process. So that's going to be a rethinking of how do we do government? How do we do legislation? How do we do codes and standards? But also things like that energy behavior. How do we make sure that everything is designed with the end user in mind? Yeah, so for us, we're definitely focused on smart grid, right? And again, not just from getting the smart meters out there, but the being able to manage and monitor the system as a whole. So getting those notifications that if a specific piece of equipment has gone down, whether it's feeder, substation, transformer, or losing power at someone's house, that we know exactly what's going on. Today, we only know if that something's gone wrong when we get a phone call. So somebody calls and says, my power's out. And then we have to play, okay, let's see how many more phone calls come in. Is it just that one house? Is it a street? Or is it a bigger problem that it's maybe a feeder or a substation? And then someone has to go drive around to try to figure out what's going on. Once we modernize that, once we digitize all of that, and we have that ability, for that swan song when a piece of equipment is dying, even if it's just a breaker that's tripped, we get that signal that says, hey, I'm tripping. And we know exactly what happened, where it happened. And so we can deploy a crew much faster with the right tools to deal with that specific problem. Because today, sometimes they get there and they go, oh, I didn't realize it was going to be that. And then they have to call an additional crews depending on what the problem is. So that's definitely a big one for us. The other, I think, is going to be really important is going to be around storage. And I don't just mean batteries in that traditional sense. So we could be doing thermal storage. And I also think hydrogen as a form of storage. So, beyond the electricity context, being able to take excess renewable energy to generate hydrogen that could be then stored to use in the winter or other times of year when demand is higher. So New Brunswick is a winter peaking utility because we heat so much with electricity here. Our load grows by 3 times in the winters, 3 times higher in the winter, because all those homes and businesses turn on their heat. It's at its lowest in the summer. So when we think of technologies like solar panels, they're producing all that great solar energy in the summer, and we don't really need the power then, right? We need it in the winter. So being able to take that excess renewable generation when we don't need it, even though it's being produced, using it to generate a type of energy like hydrogen that we can store and then use that. Instead of using fossil fuels to generate electricity, we could use stored hydrogen. So storage. So batteries, electric vehicles, are going to be a big one. The ability to have backup power for my home or my business, the ability to store excess renewable generation on site for me to use, after the sun goes down, but even just the ability to manage demand by dispatching into my home or business based on rates or different times of day when the utility needs the support. So yeah, storage in all sorts of different forms, I think, is going to play a huge part of the energy future. Yeah, so what emerging trends using the centralized energy sector and how is ME Power adjusting to them? And I think the hard part with that is there's not just one, right? So storage is one, but we've talked about things like decentralized energy, being able to produce my own power at my own site, being able to see my energy, not just once a month on my bill, but in real time so I can manage it better. But also the ability to offer things like innovative rate structures based on customers' load profiles and things like that. So we just came off a big project, the Smart Grid Atlantic that I mentioned earlier that I've been working on. And we've been doing this for the last 5 years in partnership with the National Research Council, funded by Natural Resources Canada, with players like Siemens involved in helping us do energy management and visibility and things like that. So this has been a super fun project. I do not recommend trying to do major research projects in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. That was a huge wrinkle thrown at us in the middle of our 5 years. But yeah, we basically had 500 homes and a few businesses in this study. We installed smart thermostats, smart water heater devices, smart meters, and we also put solar panels and batteries on some of the homes and businesses. So we wanted to look at everything. We wanted to look at just baselining all of these homes and businesses. How much energy do you use? Recognizing that not every consumer is the same. We all have different lifestyles and habits. And so what are those things that cause one person to have maybe a higher load profile than someone else? Somebody else might have a lower load profile. And it's not always how efficient a home is, because you have a really efficient home with terrible energy behaviors and vice versa. You can have a home that maybe isn't as energy efficient, but you're really good at managing your energy. So looking at load profiles and then looking at how various technologies and rates can help people either by influencing them based on their behaviors through rates or just introducing new technology to help them better manage their energy. It really came down to energy behavior. And that was kind of fascinating to see that relationship between something as simple as my comfort set point on my thermostat, and not necessarily that people who like it warmer have weirder load profiles. That what actually wasn't true. The scary part was that the homes with the most energy efficient behaviors, so people who turn down their thermostats a lot at night, had the highest morning peak contributions. And so for us, that morning peak is our highest peak of the day and of the year. And we now know that it's caused by people who turn their thermostats down before they go to bed at night. When they all get up in the morning and they all crank on those thermostats at the same time, they peak. And sometimes it's using up to 5 times more electricity than other homes. So these big spikes, right? And we've trained ourselves for decades, turn your thermostat down before you go to bed at night. We've been giving incentives to buy programmable thermostats, and only to find that that's actually a cause of this energy management problem. Having systems that all spike to a really high point for just a few hours every day is very difficult to maintain those big spikes and very expensive for the utility to get there. And what we did find that was interesting was that there was a group of homes, about 60% of homes in the study, that didn't have these spikes. And when we dove into combinations of technologies and the behaviors, what we found was the homes that didn't spike had heat pumps, and they didn't turn their thermostats down before they went to bed at night, because heat pumps are most efficient when you leave them alone. They're so sophisticated from a technology standpoint that you just let them run and do their thing. You don't need to turn that thermostat up and down all the time. Needing to do more of that type of innovative research, more understanding consumer behavior, more understanding how people feel about technology. Just because it's smart doesn't mean it's helpful. So yeah, really stepping out of our comfort zone and being willing to partner with our customers in a different way. And also asking our customers to partner with us in a different way, because if you think about it, 5 years to monitor your energy consumption, not just at the meter, but how often did you interact with your thermostat? How often did your water heater turn on? What's your load profile if we add solar? What happens if we put a battery in there and program it different ways? Some program for resiliency, some program to optimize time of day rates and things like that. So a very intimate relationship with our customers in that learning and understanding phase. And now hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to take what we learned, create some new programs and education campaigns and offerings that will help those customers. But also, who does it make sense for? If you like Dow thermostats, don't get this because you probably won't like the app. And making sure that we help our customers and set them up for success with making sure they get the right technologies, because that's going to be a challenge if they all start ripping out their thermostats. Yeah, so sustainability, it's a broad term, and most people would probably look at it from the context of you're generating electricity, so it's all about emissions. But even things like our renewable energy systems have an environmental footprint and an impact. So we do have 22% of our electricity today coming from hydro, and our largest plant is the Mactaquac Dam. And that changed the footprint of the province, right? So this is going in, and not only are you building hydro dams, you are creating large head ponds, you are taking over land in farms and communities that no longer exist now in New Brunswick. And that plant was supposed to last for decades. And unfortunately, there's been a challenge with it that its life expectancy has been reduced significantly. It was built in the 70s. And we're now basically talking about, okay, do we abandon this or do we refurbish it? And again, even decommissioning comes at a cost. It's going to cost probably $5 billion just to decommission it, let alone $10 billion to refurbish it. So there's a juggle right there. But it is next to ensuring land with the First Nations community. So it is very important to work closely with that First Nations community on anything that happens with that dam, their access to the river and the waterway and the fish and things like that. As well as the transmission system that passes through their territory. So, really important to work closely with our First Nations partners on things like that. But one of the big things that we're doing in partnership with UNB on this dam project is we are doing aquatic ecosystem studies. So really looking at making sure that all of the effort that we've put into things like fish passages, there we go, how do we sustain that? Whether we decide to decommission the dam or whether we choose to refurbish it, how do we actually create this ongoing access to fisheries for the First Nations community, as well as for individuals in New Brunswick wanting to maintain that ecosystem that's important to us? New Brunswick is an interesting province because we are very tied to our natural resources. So things like fisheries are a very, very important industry. Agriculture is an important industry. Forestry is a very important industry. Climate change is kind of kicking our natural resources ass, right? So we're seeing things like sea temperatures rising. That's bringing new bacteria further north that we've never seen before, infecting shellfish and making it so that we can't, fish or sell shellfish at certain times of the year. New Brunswickers see it as basically, if we want to continue our way of life that is so tied to our natural resources, we have to protect it. And again, this is kind of where MB Power has a play in that. So projects like the Mactaquac Life Achievement Project and creating that center of excellence in aquatic ecosystems. So that's actually kind of something that's been very, that we're kind of proud of, is that there's now kind of a center of excellence for aquaculture related to hydro dams based at UNB because of the work that we've done on making sure that we're protecting those waterways, whether we choose to extend the life of the dam or choose to decommission the dam. How do we protect that waterway? So yeah, so it's not just about emissions coming out of, power plants. It's about so many other things. Yeah, then that biggest challenge for us right now is kind of going back to climate change, right? And we're seeing so many weird things that we haven't seen before. So like that freak hailstorm in July, that one's probably not going to do too much to the electricity system. But we had 3 years in a row that we had those once in 100-year floods. And when your electricity network is underwater, when substations are flooded, right? So that's a big challenge because that's just power is out until the water recedes, which sometimes can be days or weeks. We have seen massive ice storms happening. There was a huge ice storm that went through kind of Quebec and New Brunswick in the late 90s. And so the standards for weatherizing electricity networks were completely changed. And so we went and we updated all of our infrastructure and we said, okay, let's make it 25% better than that code just in case something worse comes. Something worse came, and it was 3 times more than what we had built to, which made it like 5 or 6 times higher than the worst thing we'd seen before, or 20 years ago. So that's our biggest challenge right now is new extremes keep happening. We keep hitting new record cold days in the winter, but also record hot days in the summer. The record hot days in the summer are a little bit easier to handle because, we're 3 or 4 times higher in the winter. But when we have a new record cold day and we hit a new system peak, we've come close to what happened in Alberta, where we were like, we might have to start shutting off customers because we don't know that we can supply enough electricity because it's so cold out right now. So again, being able to say to customers, if it's minus 35, which you don't see very often, our system's not going to handle that for very long. So if we have a cold snap for 2 or 3 days where it's minus 35, you might want to heat to 20 instead of 22 today. So that's the kind of stuff for us is that overall system reliability. How do you design when you don't know what's going to happen next? The behavioral science space is one of the areas I'm most excited about, but also that's daunting because I know it's one of the newest areas and probably going to be one of the hardest ones for us to adjust to. But if and when we do it, that's going to be so much fun, right? Really including our customers in decision making, in program design, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that we don't talk to our customers today. That's not true at all. We are always out. I just spent the weekend at the EK Festival. We were just there to go out and say, hey, thanks for being such great customers. New Brunswick being the only officially bilingual province in the country. Behavioral science, and again, the codes and standards space, and just what technology is coming down the pipe and what are the benefits to customers. Well, smart meters are a great example of that, right? So, a lot of other provinces have definitely gone to smart meters before us, and we're on that bandwagon now. Our biggest challenge, we actually wanted to do it several years ago. And we took a business case to our regulator. It's going to cost $122 million to build a smart grid and bring smart meters to New Brunswick. And the utility will save $121 million over 10 years. Plus, we think there's additional savings or benefits to consumers down the road. So we want to spend 122 to save the utility 121, net difference of $1 million. And it's going to make electricity safer, more reliable, faster outage and response times, and incorporate more renewables more effectively. And unfortunately, the way the regulation was written is MB Power always has to choose the lowest cost option. And so because 122 million was higher than 121 million, despite all of the benefits, if we couldn't quantify how much is it worth for safer, more reliable electricity, they said no to smart meters. So we had to go back to the drawing board, come up with an entirely new business case and prove that here's the 121 that we're going to save, plus how many millions of dollars our customers are going to save. And we had to go to other provinces and states that had active, time of day and smart meter based programs. So that regulatory environment of you always have to do the lowest cost thing, despite its impacts on the environment, on whatever, has been a real challenge for us. We are the first province to heat predominantly with heat pumps. So but again, that's not something the utility has done. That's something that New Brunswickers have done. So the utility laid the grounds for that when the province said in the 70s, let's go off of oil and on to electric baseboard, is what we convert a lot of homes to, because we built a nuclear power plant to support that. And now New Brunswickers have said, we're just looking for, air conditioning in the summer and more cost-effective ways to heat in the winter. And so we are at over 60% of homes in New Brunswick now have a heat pump, which is awesome. And we've really tried to do our part by promoting cold climate heat pumps to the point where our standards for cold climate heat pumps are actually higher than what Enercan uses. But again, Enercan is probably looking more in Ontario and Alberta, where most people are heating with natural gas. So we're adding a heat pump to supplement, whereas no, we heat with electricity. And if we don't get those cold climate heat pumps that still give you really great savings when it's minus 25 and minus 30 out, that's big electricity reliability problems for us. Heat pumps aren't something that were invented in New Brunswick, but they were certainly adopted in New Brunswick. And MB Power is trying to push folks to that, colder climate, higher efficiency technology. We can argue that always having to invest in the lowest cost thing has sometimes held New Brunswick back. It's forced us to look at ways to be more innovative and more productive. I think we're embarking into both scary but exciting times. And let's be gentle with ourselves and each other, and just really try to be patient with one another, because we're going to do so many fun and amazing things. But if we don't work together, if we don't support one another, and if we don't have that end user at the forefront of every conversation decision that we're making, we're not going to be able to get there. So in my mind, it's really about collaboration and cooperation, and just a little bit of kindness for ourselves and for everybody else. Because like I said, it's going to be fun, but it's going to be scary and weird.